what is this site?
Elizabeth Denison's house. She was a former slave who then owned a lot of land. She owned land here, and then Paul, do any of you remember where Elizabeth Denison owned land besides here? There was somewhere else. And then she donated money for a church. She ended up with. So she's unusual for a woman and for a former slave. Because when we were at that area, that's what it showed. That's what it looks like.
One of the things that has been really striking to me as the students and I have been doing this research is the surprise and the disappointment that people have when they realize this is a part of Detroit's history. This is the North. Not only that, it's the Northwest Territory, and it's a place people really associate with freedom. It was actually through a project on the Underground Railroad that I ended up researching slavery. I realized that the state of Michigan actually permitted slavery. There was a loophole that made slavery legal in Michigan and in Detroit. Focusing on this material actually opens up a chapter in the history of a place where we don't expect it and we actually don't want to see it. I mean, Detroit's old. It's an early 18th century city. It had a long time to have a lot of different things unfold. Places with long histories have skeletons in the closet. One thing that we wanted to do was to share what we found. It was when we realized that we were talking about places. We were talking about locations in the city where people had lived and worked and struggled, that we thought a map would maybe be the best way to communicate what we found. So we decided to create a map and to go on a tour ourselves based on our map. Some of these were places that we had been to. I mean, many of the folks on the project had, of course, been to the Detroit River, but not realized exactly how meaningful it was, not just to the Underground Railroad, but to slavery and to slave labor, to the kind of work that enslaved people did in Michigan in the 1700s and 1800s. They seemed to see something that was beyond the buildings that we were looking at, the streets that we stood on. They were actually seeing into the past. That just has a certain kind of resonance when you're in a place that you've been to before, that you feel a personal connection with, but you see an entirely new historical context for that place.
It might have been where the United Way statue is. They would bring people and they would, you could purchase someone's labor.
Oh.
They would have to work for you for a period of time.
Okay.
More there than over there.
When we walked around the downtown streets of Detroit and saw not only no marker for the history that we had uncovered and been working on for 2 years, but also something that felt almost like a desecration. It was very disturbing. I mean, there was one moment in particular when we came across this parking lot that was in a poor state of repair, that looked basically like a junk lot. And when we realized this would have been the home of Elizabeth Denison Force, who had been an enslaved woman whose life story we had researched, whose freedom struggle we had read about, his legal case we knew about, and she had become someone in Detroit after she got her freedom who was an important businesswoman who built up her wealth through her own ingenuity and creativity, and what we saw was an empty parking lot. It was the students, really, who were, when we happened upon this, after a lot of searching, who just seemed to feel, I mean, I have to say, they seemed to feel almost as if they were injured by the lack of recognition of this woman in her life. What would it do if people living in the city, people visiting the city, realized that an African-American woman who had been enslaved and whose family bravely took their freedom had actually been able to earn enough money to own property in the city? What would that do to how people looked at the history of that city? it would just, I think, change people's outlook, their sense of what they can do, their sense of what others can do. But it wasn't there, it was just an empty lot. We develop a sense of who we are and what matters to us and where we're headed based upon our past. And if there are huge gaps in our knowledge of the past, I think we're going to be carrying those gaps forward into how we think of ourselves or try to solve problems for the future. Talking about slavery in Detroit doesn't help to paint a positive picture of the city if you're just looking at the bare fact that slavery happened. This early history might actually give people a greater sense of what's really at stake in racial and class divisions in the city and just how long those issues have been going on. I think that it helps people in those locations to recognize the deep complicity with the violation of human rights. I think that helps us to see how easy it is for people to forget about the lives, the livelihood, the well-being of others and pursue their own gain. It was a problem then, it's a problem now. And seeing the full scale of it, I think helps us to recognize something about human nature that we need to face. One thing that I have been really inspired by is a thought that was written by a colleague, Charlie Bright. He talks about residents in Detroit being left to dangle without a historical narrative that is positive and affirming for that community. I actually felt that this was kind of a call for people to do more research on Detroit that pieces together narratives that can have some kind of positive use value for residents of Detroit and residents of the state.
So we still have a woman who wants us to help her bring forth to the Michigan Women's Hall of Fame, remember?
All right.
Maybe now we'll a little bit better.
What we can do is find stories that haven't really been told before and trust that because human beings are so surprising and can be so amazing, that there will be material in those stories that can inspire people and help to restore them to their sense of identity and place and their sense of positive self-worth.